Thank you for joining us for this virtual presentation of why college admission isn't what it used to be. Brought to you by the UVA Club of Charlottesville. My name is Barbara Bozick. I'm a local realtor and board member of UVA Club of Charlottesville. We focus on programming at the local level, both in person and on Zoom. Everyone is welcome to our events and to join the club as a volunteer. UVA Club of Charlottesville is supported by the Office of Engagement is one of 100 clubs plus clubs worldwide that bring events to the community. With your support and donations, this year we were able to give two $1,000 scholarships to local students, and we thank you so much for your support. Also, this year, we're having a holiday party on December 12th at the Colonnade Club. Please look out for that event announcement on our Facebook page. Tonight's discussion will be with Margaret Bolton Baudinet, a UVA grad and the owner of and CEO of College Solutions, which is a service to parents as they navigate the college admission process. No doubt, as you signed up for this presentation, you read Margaret's credentials. She has quite a resume, doesn't she? From her years at Legacy Admissions at UVA to writing coach, consultant, counselor, mentor, and to college advisor and CEO of her own company, Margaret is a true asset to any parent who's trying to navigate this process. I met Margaret 15 years ago when I walked into her UVA office with my daughter, and I have been a huge fan ever since. No doubt about it. She is an amazing mom, a great businesswoman, and without further delay, because she has so many of your questions to answer, I would like to turn this presentation over to her capable hands. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Barbara. That was so nice. Yeah, I remember the day that I met Barbara and her darling daughter, Tina. Tina is one of those that when she walks in a room, it just kind of lights up. And it was just so fun to be a part of their college admissions journey. But glad to be here with you tonight. I see a lot of names that I recognize, so glad y'all are here. Thanks for coming. Our goal is to kind of talk through what we think is different about applying to college now as it was when we applied to college lots of years ago at this point. But because this is such an important topic, and because I imagine you have a lot of questions, I brought kind of my sidekick, my guru, Stephanie Pluta. Stephanie has been, working with College Solutions for more years than I remember, but she is just kind of the brain behind the operations here. Steph, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about your background a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Funny enough, Margaret and I graduated from UVA at the same year, got to know each other probably actually right after we graduated. I studied there, earned a degree in Italian and history. I started working in undergraduate admissions soon after. I thought my world was going to be in academia, so ended up getting a master's in medieval history. From there, I ended up teaching Latin and history and found my way back into admissions by working with Margaret and with College Solutions. And I like to just kind of say what I really enjoy about this process and moving from the other side of the desk to this side of the desk. And a lot of what Margaret and I do, it's more than just the admissions process. It's really getting to know students, their priorities, and giving them things to think about beyond admissions, careers, majors, and honestly, what they value. So as much as this world can get really crazy, the reason that we kind of stay in this role is we get to know a lot of juniors and a lot of parents really as people, juniors, seniors, transfer students, as who they are, and help them with where they want to go as opposed to where they feel like they should go. So Margaret, I'll give it back to you.
Awesome. That was great, Steph. Thank you. Feel free to throw in any questions you have in the Q&A box. We love questions. We'll talk all night if you want us to. I imagine you don't. But if you have questions, feel free to throw them in. We are open books. I think both of us believe that this process can be full of drama and stress and rumors and parents sharing war stories. And we would love to minimize that if we can. I think between the two of us, we've been in the higher ed world for 25 plus years, and we know what we're doing, we assure you. So we're going to talk you through these 5 things that are different and how you should start thinking about talking to your kids about college or planning for college. And you guys throw out whatever's on your mind. We're happy to field what we can. All right, let's jump in. All right, so the first thing that I consider to be different about the college admissions process now, as opposed to 20 years ago, is that context matters. A lot of families will say to me, you know, we go to this great high school and this many kids get into college. That's great. Colleges are really considering your child within the context from which they come. So if they go to a wonderful private school that has lots of APs and fancy study abroad programs, great. If they don't, that's okay too. Colleges are going to look at a school and read what's called the school profile. So a school profile is put together by a guidance counselor at the high school, and it will kind of tell the story of the way a high school does business. What curriculum is offered, what percentage go to college, what colleges those students go to, the grading scale, you know, is a 90 an A, is a 93 an A? Do they not do grades? Do they do, you know, different letters? Just kind of the lowdown on this is how we work. Colleges read that first, the school profile. If you've never seen the one for your school, you can ask the guidance counselor. That's not a bad thing. They have it. They won't be annoyed. But it will kind of give you an idea of what colleges see before they dive in to a student's transcript. Curriculum is by far the most important thing you want to be thinking about when setting your child up for admission to college. You'll often hear Stephanie and I call this program or curriculum, same thing. You want your student to take a good balance of classes, erring on the side of more difficult. I am not suggesting that your child take every honors class and every AP class until, you know, they fall asleep at their desk every night. No, but curriculum is probably one of, if not the most important variable in college admissions. And when we worked at Virginia, we were very aware that Virginia prioritizes curriculum. What does that look like? Typically, it would mean honors classes in 9th and 10th grade. Some underclassmen will take AP Human Geography. Some will take AP World as a 10th grader. And then 11th grade usually looks like 3, 4, 5 APs, depending on the student, depending on the school. And then senior year, 3, 4, 5, 6 APs. Again, every child is different and every school is different. And there are some teachers that make some classes really fun or some classes really hard. I understand that. I will caution you that there are certain APs that are considered easier than not. If you ask your kids this, they won't want to tell you, but they will at some point. AP Human Geography is an easier one, but appropriate for an underclassman. The tricky ones get to be like these AP electives, like AP Psychology, AP Environmental Science, AP Statistics, all very interesting classes. The tricky part becomes when students start replacing their core classes with these electives. So for instance, one of the things that Steph and I do with our students is we help them pick out classes for every year. It's probably one of my favorite things to do, honestly. If a student comes to us and says, okay, senior year, I'm going to take AP Stats instead of AP Calc, immediately we'll probably start saying, "Ooh, are you sure?" A lot of colleges do not teach pre-calc in a college curriculum. And so if a student has not had pre-calc as a minimum, college is going to be hard on the math front. And most colleges will require some sort of math class, with the exception of schools that have an open curriculum. So if you have a choice between calc and statistics, most parents will think stats is appropriate and practical. And yes, my kid needs to know that. Of course, I use statistics every day as a business owner. But if your child can take calculus in high school, we strongly recommend it. Even if it's not AP calculus, some sort of calculus is considered the more college preparatory route. So keep those kinds of things in mind. Most school counselors know these kinds of things. I think it is kind of a dance for school counselors because they don't want to be overbearing, but they also want to offer you ideas, which is a good thing. I think the benefit of having somebody like me or somebody like Steph is that we're going to be like, no, you can't do that. You really need to think about doing calculus, and here's why. A lot of this depends on the colleges you're looking at. You know, some students are looking at teeny tiny liberal arts schools. Some students are looking at the giant University of California schools. You know, my favorite students are the ones looking at UVA. No, I'm just kidding. But it really depends on the school. But curriculum does matter. Class rank also matters. A lot of high schools do not rank anymore. So, you know, this would be, this student is number 1 out of 60 students in the senior class. That's a class rank. Most schools don't do that. I would say the exceptions are those in the deep, deep South. There's one in Richmond that does it, maybe 2 in Richmond that do it. But otherwise, most schools are moving towards the decile system. So schools on the school profile will say, you know, the top 10% of our student class, of our senior class, has this GPA in this range. And then the next slice is this range. So it's not saying one student is over the other, it's just offering a grouping. Ideally, you want your kid to be in the top group, but students get into the second slice and the third slice, those kids get into great colleges. So if you go to a very selective, very competitive high school, I think about a place like Maggie Walker or Lawrenceville or Exeter or one of these Stanford Online schools. Like, those schools are really competitive to be in the top slice. Those kids are going to Ivy League schools. So again, think about context, and you want to make sure that whatever the high school is communicating to the college is comprehensive. So for instance, if you go to one of those tippy top high schools and it's really hard, you really want to make sure the guidance counselor is explaining that in a guidance counselor recommendation. And we can talk about that if you like. Last thing is region. Colleges want people from everywhere. You know, that's part of their kind of ideal diversity, is to have the student from New Mexico and to have the student from Sweden and have them be roommates. You know, that sounds really cool to a college. Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, Steph and I visit colleges every year. We have to see like 10 every year to stay accredited individually. So as a firm, you know, College Solutions has 7 counselors. So we're seeing 70, 80, 90 colleges every year. Most colleges agree they want geographic diversity, among other things. So yes, colleges are very excited when kids from New Mexico apply, or when kids from Nevada apply, because, you know, 90% of Nevadans stay in state for college. So yes, geography can help a student in admission. I always have families who say, like, okay, we'll just move to Nevada and then we'll get into all the colleges. I don't recommend this. Like, that is, gaming the system is not worth it. But you should be mindful, if you're applying to a college where there are a lot of other students already applying, it's not going to make your child as interesting if they were applying to a different school that didn't have as many applicants from the same high school. Okay, Steph, I'll let you jump in.
Cool. Okay. And thanks for all the questions in the chat. What we're going to do is go through our PowerPoint or our presentation first. And then some of you submitted questions beforehand. I'm seeing a lot of ones that kind of correlate. So I think we're going to be able to actually hit a lot of the questions that you're asking that we're going to be able to do. Okay, hot button topic. Test optional does not actually mean optional. There are a lot of questions. I would say the majority of the questions beforehand were regarding test optional, how to handle testing. So let's see if Margaret and I can help with this slide. It is a bit of a moving target. And every year, every client, my neighbors, Margaret's neighbors, they all ask, can I actually get out of taking tests? Like, do we actually think the SAT and ACT? I have a neighbor who swears to me that it's on the out. We're not going to take it anymore. You're never going to see it again. And that's a big fat false. So my short answer is no. As a high schooler or as a parent of a high schooler, yes, your student is still going to have to take tests. So a little bit of background. I love figuring out how we get to this point to understand where we're going to go from here. So before 2020, before COVID hit, college admissions, some schools were toying with the idea of going test optional. Some did, Wake Forest being one of the big ones. They've been test optional for more than a decade. Once COVID hit, pretty much all schools went test optional, meaning you don't have to turn in test scores if you don't have them or if you don't want to. Service academies and the public universities in Florida were the only ones that have like continually required test scores. Once that kind of went into place, There are a bit of mixed reviews. Overall, test optional allows for applications to increase. So it's a boon for a lot of universities to stay test optional. Some schools have come back 3 years later, 4 years later, say, yep, we like this. And they've issued permanent statements that we will remain test optional. We can use them if a student sends them. We don't need them to evaluate our class. Some are saying, this works for now. And they kind of keep renewing their contract. Oh, we're test optional through 2024. And then in 2024, we hear, oh, we're test optional till 2025. And some have doubled down and said, like MIT, they've said, nope, we want test scores and we're always going to want test scores. Often the mandate for test scores, funny enough, comes from outside of the admissions offices. Frequently faculty, VP, people in president's offices, they want these numbers. These are statistics that they can report to rankings. And I'm speaking very generally, like this isn't like my knowledge specifically with UVA or with another school, but when you hear of schools toying with the idea, this is not the dean of admissions saying, I think we'll stick with test scores this year. This is a bigger discussion, and the big term that we use is enrollment management. So often now you will see directors of admission and they report to a VP of enrollment management, and they are looking at all of this within context. So the data is kind of out to be interpreted. Some places like University of Connecticut, their president has come out and said, test optional has created a more diverse class. And we really think this works. Testing has been proven to be skewed by race as well as affluence. And that kind of gets to my 2 points on here. The latter category for affluent families generally have access to test prep, generally will test higher. A lot of our clients end up engaging in test prep as well. I think it's very rare that we see students who go out, take a test, ace it cold, and only do it one time. Those days are far gone. So going back to, should you be test optional? How do you determine if you should be test optional? This choice really depends upon the rest of your application. It kind of gets to the last point. To narrow it down to a question, we like to ask, is it a plus on your application? Does it reflect how you are doing in school? Is there a correlation to your transcript? Like, are you taking a solid set of courses and getting A's, but your testing still seems to be sub middle 50% of a lot of schools? That is when I would say you are a good candidate for being test optional. It really depends on schools. It really depends on the application as a whole. We get a lot of people who will just approach us and ask us questions. Hey, do you think I should be test optional? The good admission readers in us will say, it kind of depends. I have students I've known for years, and we are still discussing their application as a whole and whether it would be prudent to be test optional in that case. But definitely questions that we get on a daily basis. Okay, moving on, because I know we've got stuff and questions, and we totally want to hear your questions. Demonstrated interest, another wonderful hot button topic that's really kind of shifting these days. It's one of those that Margaret and I love to discuss because we have a lot of theories about it as well. What is demonstrated interest? This is you showing a school that you're interested in them either before you apply or after you apply. The schools are all of the spectrum of this is bigger than the spectrum of light. Like, we've got everything from the purple range to like infrared light. And I don't know physics very well, but all I can say is demonstrated interest is entirely how a school wants to use it. Now, why? Why do they care? Let me just preface by saying UVA is not one of the demonstrated interest schools. So if you want to turn off the listening for whether this applies to UVA, they do not consider this. So demonstrated interest. Why bother visiting? Why bother doing Zoom calls or send emails? What is actually demonstrated interest? So the first part is yield. Algorithms, the yield rate, the percentage of students who accept an offer, it makes a difference in rankings. And honestly, there's such a narrow margin to get this wrong. And if some of you remember Virginia Tech in like 2017, I want to say, and they over-enrolled by a significant amount, where all of a sudden their algorithm by the number of students they offered to the number of students who matriculated was way off. They got super popular over the course of a year, and they had to dip into their endowment like millions of dollars to ask students to not come for a semester or to study abroad for a semester. So that yield percentage, knowing if you're going to show up on if you are going to say yes, is incredibly important, perhaps the most important percentage in this whole admissions process. We're going to come back to COVID. Algorithms got super wonky in COVID. And so colleges couldn't rely upon their exact admittance number. They had to get very conservative. You didn't want to necessarily over enroll or over admit. They found that a number of students really preferred flagship schools. Big state schools got very popular. Think about it. If you're living in Virginia and you're going out to Gonzaga, way out in Washington, and you get sent home, you have to fly all the way back home. A lot of students just transferred to local schools. They didn't want to have to fly back with the thought of, oh, shoot, the next semester, I'm just going to have to keep flying back home. So local schools, bigger local schools, bigger name schools, gotten extremely popular. And so with these like unpredictable times, these yield rates, understanding where a student or if a student is going to end up coming, demonstrated interest has become either more popular or less opaque, a little bit more forward within the process. So yield affecting the rankings, regional admissions representatives. I think these have been around for a while, but for all of us, especially our parents, reading regionally is a fairly new phenomenon for a lot of schools. I know UVA started, they kind of read regionally, and then, I mean, it's been in place for at least a decade now, but they were one of the later schools to start having admissions representatives. So what this means is that an admissions rep can focus on a smaller subset of schools. So like UVA, if you go on their website, they have a couple counselors that read specifically for Northern Virginia, specifically for the Richmond area, specifically for Massachusetts. What that does mean is as a student, you can contact the office and have a person there, you can ask questions about your what classes, if this class is preferred over this class, or, if you wanted to meet with them and they consider interest, that you have a single point person or a couple point people that you can be in touch with. Does a student have to email their admissions representative? I would say if they do demonstrate interest, if it's a school that does consider demonstrated interest, and they advertise it, they usually have to be pretty honest about this. They put this in their data, whether they consider it or don't consider it in the process. Yeah, and there are always interesting ways that you can email a rep without sounding like, okay, I'm just emailing you in order that, I don't appear as what we call a ghost applicant, someone who just all of a sudden appears, throws their hat in the ring, never visited the school, never done anything virtually. So this all kind of goes hand in hand to what schools like to call engagement, not continual communication, but consistent communication. This might be a visit junior year, take an official admissions information session and tour, something you have to sign up for, something that you do have, they have your email address. Signing up for the email lists. These are all ways that you can demonstrate interest. Maybe the school has an open house. Maybe they have a virtual open house. Maybe they have a live chat online. I think Margaret and I right now, if we had 20 seconds, we could think of 20 different ways that you can show interest to a school. Choosing early decision can actually be kind of an interesting side way of choosing them, of showing interest. Early decision is binding. That means that you are my number one school. If you say yes, I'm 100% going to show up. Even schools that say they don't demonstrate interest, it can potentially be a boost to you. It might be small, it might be large, for you to apply early decision. All of this said, it is worth it for you to see if a school demonstrates interest. I generally say that if a school is under 10,000 students, there's a really good chance that they do demonstrate interest. UVA is one of those schools, they totally don't, but I do know some larger schools that, they've got a lot of applications to sift through. And so they want to see, hey, are you showing up on campus? Are we actually, one of those extra applications that you just paid the fee for to show, just to apply? Or do you actually care about, who we are? Do you want to actually study neuroscience here? we're getting kind of in the data stuff, which is stuff that Margaret and I love to look at. It's very fascinating. And actually, even you have access to a lot of this data. There is a great admissions dean, Dean J, Janine, actually. Margaret and I have both worked with her. She keeps a great admissions blog, if you're not familiar with it, a great Instagram site. She really was at the beginning of posting stuff on Instagram and getting people to kind of listen to her instead of necessarily calling the admissions office. I even pull up her website when I'm talking about UVA early decision stats. So you actually can find a lot of this data, whether or not you need to demonstrate interest or whether or not you're just looking for basic percentages that you can now look on social media for that. Which actually, I didn't mean for this to happen, but it kind of leads really well into the next slide, which is about data reads. Oh, what are data reads? It's when a school will use basic data that could be used as statistics to go through the process of evaluating your application. As Americans, a lot of us are horrified by this. It's not actually a new thing. It's kind of been around for a while, but then fell out of favor. It's kind of a little anti-American dream, but let me give a little bit of background. For my parents, and actually a few of the schools I applied to, they used to give cutoffs of SATs and GPA scores, or GPA, the GPAs that you earned. Admissions is reactionary. It's cyclical as well. So sometimes when we go out of the habit of doing something that we think is unfair or unfair to the process, that at the same time we will reevaluate and use it again. And that's kind of where data reads have come back. Internationally, data reads are still used. If you think about applying to UK schools, Margaret and I have a lot of experience with students going to Canada. This is a big thing, at least in looking at scores and in looking at how well you do on your tests. So the move to returning to these data reads, pre-screening apps by GPA and testing, it was kind of happening before COVID, but here we go, talking about COVID again. This was a rapid accelerant. Again, these larger flagship schools become more popular, the bigger move to stay home. We also see this trend that if a school gets popular, they win a national championship, like Georgia, like happened a few times, all of a sudden they get a big spike in applications. The other side of it is admissions is really run on a shoestring budget. It's not a super flashy office, especially within public schools. They always need more readers. They even like contract out to get readers. So you have not full-time, only part-time admissions people, sometimes reading applications. And so they need to process a lot of information in a short time. A very short time. Sometimes, submitting applications, Auburn now has like a September 15th deadline, and I think it really helps them spread out when applications are being submitted. With data reads, there isn't a standard process, so that we get that question a lot of how does this exist? This is really a school by school thing. And again, it not being new, this is, schools have kind of figured out at what point in the process are they going to run reports according to GPAs or according to test scores. Some schools are more open about this than not. Going back to Auburn, I think they're one of the more transparent schools about this. They used to have, and I think at least even this year, Margaret will confirm this, like you have a 3.6, you can be test optional about that. If you have under 3.6, you need to tell us why, or we 100% need your scores one way or another. And they will often, I don't know if it was Auburn, but definitely another school we were talking to, where they say with their early applicants, they pretty much data read the whole first set of classes. You're up through your senior year, they'll look through your application. If you're kind of borderline, they'll defer you to regular admission, where they have a little bit more time to evaluate you. But, if you are way below what they think that they could admit, it would be a deny, but they end up deferring, bumping students from early admission into regular admission. This is where our favorite acronym comes into play: artificial intelligence, AI. Everybody loves this. They're horrified by it. They love it at the same time. I was just reading an article, a day or two ago, on the different ways schools might use this to screen candidates. A lot of it is with mailing. Oh, okay. So when you've opened up your common application and you've added Auburn as a school, they start putting you on their email list. And maybe you've already selected communications as a major. They're going to start sending you emails that say things about communication. They're going to start looking for you by region. These we like to call them algorithms. I think that's the safe term, but honestly, this is no different than, the same kind of technology that ChatGPT uses to help them process a lot of information in a short amount of time. This is tangentially related to this, but like the admittance according to major, one way, this is a way that data can really help. I know I don't have it on this slide. I'm also happy to answer more questions about this. Larger schools, a lot of them are accepting students according to the major, which means you need to have this selected before you apply. Again, this is common practice outside of the United States. If you ever read the UCAS essays, they have to say, what are you going to major in and why? And they match you to an institution. But a great way to kind of see the effect of how your major selection can influence whether you are accepted to a school is look at Virginia Tech. They actually publish admittance by major. UVA doesn't do this. They do not consider your major really in the process. They think of you according to school, right? So are you applying to arts and sciences, to engineering, to architecture, or to nursing? But you can call a school and ask, is this a more competitive major or not? I was just on the phone with South Carolina not too long ago, asking them about the difference of acceptance between their business school and their engineering school. Always a hot topic. We get really worried about AI and the processes within them. Okay, now, but this is really everybody's favorite side. Money talks. Well, let me just preface this with what it means to be need aware in a process and need blind in a process. When your application makes it to admissions, they have generally one of two policies within an admissions process, and they vary a little bit. We're just going to keep it into two. Either they will see that you need financial aid, like need-based financial aid, or they don't. Need aware is the former. They will know if you can pay full tuition with loans, merit, or pay tuition without loans, without merit money. Need blind, this is UVA. So some of this discussion about the full pay family side of it, when I'm reading an application, when I was reading an application, financial aid is in a totally different office. Like I couldn't have told you then how to walk through a FAFSA form if you paid me. All institutions will tell you if they're one or the other. So my first comment here doesn't relate as much to UVA and need blind schools, but for schools that are need aware. If you haven't read Jeff Salingo's book, Who Gets In and Why, he explains this and how hard it is for need aware schools. That honestly, everybody wishes that they have unending amounts of endowment that they can just cover whether you can pay for it or whether you can't. But it's helpful to think of a lot of universities closer to businesses. There is a bottom line. They do need tuition to cover certain expenses, research, think tanks. Like UVA barely gets any of their money from the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's barely a public school. So tuition, and I said that they're need blind. So you wouldn't see that in the admissions process, but that's just to say how important that tuition can be throughout the whole process. So sometimes demonstrating that you are a full pay client, that you are a full pay applicant, perhaps is the best way of saying it, can be a plus in the process. This isn't a student that we're going to have to dip into our endowment for to help cover. The next one aren't new for college admissions, but they can be big game changers. And another good point to Jeff's book, I'm a big fan of it, is that they're going to be institutional priorities for every class. This goes back to the term enrollment management. Athletes, I think, are the best example of this. Technically, they still have to go through the admissions process for a school, but for that star running back, athletics is going to come to the head of admissions and say, hey, these guys we've signed to play here, make sure that their admissions say admit. They do need to actually submit things. It used to be that they did have to take the tests. The NCAA used to require test scores. Now they're technically test optionals, but schools can also say, like, Division III schools can turn and say, yes, we will admit said applicant, but they do need to score X amount on their SATs. There are what we call like lobbying groups within colleges and universities that kind of run a similar game. This is not unknown, I think, for many of us, like development, alumni, politically exposed people. There will be meetings with administration and admissions where a student might be flagged or checked up on. How much does that weigh in the process? It really, really depends on the priorities of schools. I was working with a student who was applying to a school where one of the colleges was named after his uncle or his grandfather or something like that. So big name, the name would have been noticed. The parents were very realistic about this. The student was strong, but but still this connection was not something that automatically gave him admittance to the school. In fact, I think they waitlisted him. Not heartbroken, but just to kind of say that like there aren't guarantees, but I guarantee that the student was probably flagged at some point to just kind of like be checked up on. Have I seen these connections make a difference? Margaret and I would both say yes, but they are few and very specialized. Again, thinking of the sports analogy, there has to be a reason for the school to want to honor it. There are a lot of people asking for attention. I would say within admissions, this is why there's a VP for enrollment. Every year, we live in Richmond. Every year I speak with clients who have real, tangible relationships with Board of Visitors, next door neighbors, babysat kids, parents work together, and we have to walk through whether this connection is going to mean anything in the process. This is also a great place, although Margaret we might talk about legacy admissions later. This is going to be a huge, oh no, well, honestly, if you want to talk about, I'll give a little bit, and then actually I'd love it if you want to add stuff to the slide too. Right. So SCOTUS, the Supreme Court case, yes, that was more about race not being used as a plus factor within admissions, but now all of us see, shoot, what else is being used as a plus factor or as a consideration that could potentially be deemed unconstitutional? Like, are they from a state or a country, or do they leave baskets underwater? Do we need another person for this particular team? Alumni status is one of these plus factors. Most of us in this business believe it will slowly trickle away, having like any bearing within admissions. In fact, UVA says that they do not consider it. Like, it's not a checkbox. You don't get an extra check that's like, oh, this person's legacy. They've now given a lovely essay. Some of you may have been applying, you may have seen this, where they ask for your connections to the school. I have to say that a lot of my clients really like this because they may not be an alumnus or alumna, but they get to talk about a connection for the school. So it's very cheerful for the student, but it's not going to be the way it used to be. At one point, if you were out of state kid of an alumnus or an alumna, you were given in-state consideration. It used to be a huge boost. That is way far gone. And now there is no box marked like whether or not you went to UVA. But I still think there's going to be a matter of time. It's going to be short when another lawsuit pops up, probably talking about legacy admissions in schools. If you do the research for it, and I'm just going to deposit it, alumni consideration kind of came in for the wrong reasons in the 1920s, but schools do use it to help with yield rates. Again, going back to enrollment management. Hey, this is a family that sent a lot of kids here. I have a feeling that this kid is going to come. Should we offer to them? So, Margaret, did you want to add to the legacy side of it?
That was great. I will say there are institutions that, at least upon observation, I've been doing this since 2009. There are some institutions that value their alumni community more so than other institutions. I would put Cornell in that bucket. I would put Carolina in that bucket. I put Virginia in that bucket. Florida, Gator Nation is real. Like, if you went to Florida, holy moly. But I do think there are institutions that still prioritize alumni relations and what that means for a family who has their child get into UVA specifically. No, it's not a label anymore, but I do think the community essay question is worth answering if your family has something to say. If 5 generations have been to Virginia and, your child came home from the hospital wearing a UVA onesie, cool. I do think the best way to answer this question is to talk about values. Talk about the values that Virginia taught you or your children and why that will affect him, her, whoever in going to UVA. So I think if you can identify kind of UVA specific values and then incorporate those, of course, knowing Board of Visitors helps. Of course, knowing donors. I know this sounds aggressive, but I would say bigger donors, so we're not talking about $20 a year for the last 20 years. Like, thank you. I'm sure somebody benefited from that, but we're thinking, high 6 figures kind of thing. All of that is helpful. None of it is an admission stamp. There's just no such thing. But I do think if you have kind of the community of UVA folks around you, you may find that some of them say, I want to support your child in the admissions process. That's kind of the lingo. Support your child in the admissions process. If you have someone that you think is a big deal, that you want to support your child, you can always reach out to them and say, hey, you know what? My kiddo's applying to Virginia. Are you interested in supporting them in the admissions process? If that feels icky, totally up to you. But that's kind of the way it works. I will caution you that most folks who have an ability to stand up for someone in the admissions process will only do it for 1 or 2 students. It's rare that I see a BOV member or somebody like that say, oh, here are my 14 kids that I want to get into UVA this year. They're very specific. They'll usually want to talk to the child. Most of the former BOVs like to talk to the kids. But keep in mind, nothing is a black and white clear admission.
I have to say, sometimes it's also linked to early decision. So like, if you're going to go down that route, you probably will be locked into the school. I had this happen with a student in Duke, where there was a big connection with Duke, and Duke more or less came back and said, you would have to apply ED. And the student said no. So there might be more involved with that. Margaret, I think you have.
Yeah, it's me.
Okay.
Okay. So what? This is what Stephanie and I say mostly at the end of staff meetings of like, so what does all this mean? You should start early with your students if they're looking into applying to college. Some students are not ready for a 4-year institution, and that's really okay. I want you to hear me say that, and I want you to see Stephanie nodding her head of, we see students take gap years. We see students do community college for a couple of years. We see students work for a couple of years. The fast track course straight into a 4-year institution, not required for success, excuse me. And I will say that if you have a child who is kind of in that boat right now, really encourage you to look at the guaranteed agreement between Virginia community colleges and the public schools in the state of Virginia. There is a guaranteed agreement between those folks that say, if you take these community college classes and you get a B or above, you're guaranteed admission to UVA for your last 2 years. It is not the sexy approach to college admission. It's not getting the letter in the mail and all the jumping. But if you have a kiddo that this process just doesn't quite fit, please look at that. Or even if you're out of state and you're looking at a local community college, that transfer process is not guaranteed, but very favorable for transfer students. We work with transfer students every year. So start early, yes. But if you don't have a child that fits the mold of fast track to college, it's okay. It's really okay. Find appropriate sources of information. As I mentioned before, I think this process is riddled with anxiety and chatter and moms talking at tennis and like all kinds of stuff. It doesn't have to be if you find good data. Hopefully your school counselor can do that. We have a whole business that does that, but there are great places like the Department of Education has what's called a college scorecard. It was started back with Obama, and it quantifies the median starting salaries of students from each college based on major. So if you have a child looking at TCU for the business school and Florida for the business school, you can literally go into the scorecard and look at what the starting salaries are for kids who just graduated with a business degree from Florida and kids who just graduated from a degree from TCU. Money's not everything, but I think when you think about college as an investment in your child's future, you'll want to make sure they're not coming back home to sleep on your couch. At least I want to think that. So know that there are great sources of data. You don't have to get stuck in the tornado of anxiety. And the last piece is about merit aid. I'm really passionate about merit aid. I went to college on merit aid because I'm from Alabama. And if I didn't go to the University of Alabama, my parents were not paying for it. And I really wanted to go to UVA. Merit aid is not only from the colleges. You hear a lot of families say, oh, my kid got into Dickinson and they got a full ride. Sure, that's possible. Schools have those things. UVA has the Jefferson, WNL has the Johnson, Davidson has the Belk. We can go all day. But it doesn't just have to be that. That's a very small pool of really cool students, there are other merit opportunities. I would encourage you to look at places like the Coca-Cola Foundation. You know, they have, I want to say it's 50 scholarships that are $25,000 a year, renewable, that can help a student go to a college that may not be feasible for a family. The Elk Foundation, ELK, the Elk Foundation has most valuable student. You don't have to be an Elk or anything related to it. I want to say it's 12.5 in scholarships a year, merit-based. So based on how cool and interesting your kid is, nothing to do with your tax returns, nothing to do with how many in your family, everything to do with how cool and interesting your kiddo is. So if you're looking at some of these colleges and just getting sick to your stomach of like, there's no way I'm paying $82,000 a year for Tulane. I'm not, but if you want to help yourself, there are merit opportunities that exist outside of the colleges because their budgets are tight. All right. Questions. I imagine you guys are either stressed, exhausted, or want to ask like 15 more questions. So
Margaret, I'm going to start by asking you, and this kind of goes back to the first thing that you were saying about a strong curriculum. And it was helpful to hear you talk about it in context, like you need to go in context of the school. But sometimes at schools, you have choices between AP, IB, and dual enrollment.
Yeah.
Is there a difference?
Oh, the menu. I mean, this is almost like the best case, worst case scenario of you can take AP, you can take IB, you can take dual enrollment. You know, it's like stand on your head and run a race. Which one do I do? I would suggest you think about how the curriculum fits your child. Most schools that have AP, IB, DE, dual enrollment will have info sessions for all of the classes. The good thing about AP and IB classes is that they have that, what I would call content mastery test at the end of the class. So the AP test or the IB test, that can demonstrate how well a student has retained the information in that subject matter. And those scores, if they're available, can be used for college admissions. Dual enrollment is a little tricky. Dual enrollment, there's no standardized curriculum, right? So dual enrollment English could mean writing 6 papers at 8 pages apiece. It could be watching movies and writing personal reflections. Nobody really knows. If it is a harder class, I suggest having the guidance counselor write that in the guidance counselor recommendation, because there is no rubric for dual enrollment classes. The only exception I would say would be math classes. Students who have maxed out of math in high school and want to go take multivariate or differential equations or all that super duper math that I never took, those are understood to be quite rigorous. But I would say AP and IB, because they have the test at the end, is helpful in college admissions. Dual enrollment is the gray area. So if you're taking one of the harder classes, make sure it's clarified in the file. What was I going to say? Last piece. It's gone now. Oh, I remember. IB classes are typically more group work oriented and more writing intensive. So if you have a student who loves to write, IB could be the right fit for them. Again, we're shooting for fit. We're not shooting for enough. I try to tell families to take the word enough out of your vocabulary, at least while your child's applying to college, because it's not about smart enough APs, you know, enough extracurriculars. No. It's about the right fit and letting your child be authentic. That's really, really the goal. Try hard not to like overachieve on them if you can. But IB is more writing intensive.
And I think going back to the dual enrollment in Virginia, we're really lucky to have pretty solid community colleges. And Virginia schools know when a dual enrollment, Virginia colleges know generally if a dual enrollment class is solid or not. Out of state, it's really different. Like the community college system within Georgia is different than Florida. So DE, as Margaret was saying, it really depends on how the school profile talks about it, which goes back to her first point of, if you haven't seen your school profile, you should go get it yesterday, today. A lot of them are online, a lot of them are not. I've gotten a lot of questions about homeschooling, and I have to say I'm a homeschooling mom. And so the question is, do you have any specific admission recommendations for homeschool students? I know this doesn't apply to a lot of you out there, but there are some things that are applicable to all students. Homeschooling, similar to not understanding, like dual enrollment can be different in depending on where you come from. Homeschooling is kind of the same thing. Sometimes you can be taking classes from Laurel Springs or for Stanford Online, and it can just be kind of a hybrid show, but you have a standard class that's just being taught remote. These schools will know how to produce a transcript, and basically it's just a school, but you're not with other students. A lot more students post-COVID decided that remote work is great. We see more hybrid kind of work, or at least I know a lot of people who do, like a couple classes online. Maybe they start taking a class at a community college, and then they do some independent work either through a textbook that their mom has, or maybe their mom's a teacher, or my daughter's killing me right now because I'm teaching her Latin because that's what I used to teach. So you see homeschoolers coming from a lot of different backgrounds, doing a lot of different curricula. So data really means a lot. When there were SAT-2s, they were the best thing for homeschoolers because it was a standard test they could take to show proficiency. AP is kind of like that. SAT-2s don't exist anymore. The problem with AP is that you have to teach to the test. But I do know a number of homeschoolers that are going that route, and that maybe they will study modern European history, and in the last month learn specifically to how the test is taught. So anything that can be data, that can show context, getting involved in debate that can be going through the high school, or in various clubs, or if you're swimming or you're in club sports, anything that basically can show you within context of other students doing similar things means something in the process. I often find that homeschoolers are super involved, or there's a reason for homeschooling. Margaret and I worked with a student that's probably going to be in the Olympics for showing, excuse me. And she took all her normal courses. They just were online. With her, finding letters of recommendation are the most difficult thing because you need a teacher technically to write it. And sometimes these online schools, they have guidance counselors, sometimes they don't. That's something that we can help with through that process. But if you think about it like that first slide, you are trying to put yourself within context, and instead of a qualitative analysis of what you've done, often showing concretely how you can relate to somebody of the same grade is what's going to mean the most in the process. Let's see, Margaret.
I think I can address, a lot of folks have asked questions about specializing in high school or avoiding a certain subject in high school, which I think we can all identify with. I'd love to touch on that a little bit because I think it applies to a lot of families. Typically, when we are advising families, and granted, our staff comes from Northwestern and Stanford and Swarthmore and Virginia, so we kind of have this kind of consortium of admissions knowledge. But when we are advising students, we try to keep them as close to the core curriculum as we can. So English, foreign language, math, science, history. We usually get pushback on foreign language. There are a lot of students who do not care for foreign language, like Eleanor, but we really try to keep them within that kind of 5 solids box, the core classes. If they want to add electives, great. So comp sci, coding, cybersecurity, technology, great. It gets tricky when a student drops a core class and chooses an elective. Reason being, most colleges have a core curriculum. Think about Columbia. They have it's very intense core curriculum. So when students come into a college environment, colleges want them to be ready for that core curriculum. Because another thing that affects rankings is dropout and transfer rate. So if a college admits a student who is not ready for their core curriculum, it's a risk, it's a liability to their rankings. And nobody likes that. Nobody wants to hurt their rankings. So if you have a student that over specializes, I encourage them to over specialize in the elective space or in like the summer internship space. So, go do the internship with the computer science guy or whatever it is that interests you, but try to stay as close to the core curriculum as possible. I get questions about foreign language all the time of, can I drop it in senior year? You know, can I drop it and take another class? I really like students to stay in foreign language at least through 10th grade. I'd like to see it in 11th grade if possible. Some students have dyslexia and it's just not going to happen. Okay, there is a foreign language waiver for students with learning differences. But if you're going to drop a foreign language, I always tell a student, if you're going to drop a foreign language, you got to put something back in that is equally rigorous as foreign language. So I always have students say, okay, I'm going to drop AP Spanish and I'm going to take, you know, marketing. No, 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 you're not. You could drop AP Spanish and take, you know, AP Stats as well as AP Calc, or you can drop AP Spanish and take AP Bio and AP Chem, but marketing and AP Spanish are not equivalent on the rigor scale. So specializing is cool. Do it in the elective space or in the summer internship space.
I have to say that the curriculum discussion is what Margaret and I do with the majority of our time with clients before senior year. All of our meetings before senior year is a discussion. Every single one of them, it contains discussion about curriculum. So this is very personal to a student and what your school has to offer. I know we don't have much time. There's a great question, and maybe Margaret also might want to weigh in on this one. We didn't talk about the actual process itself. And do admissions reader actually read the essays, and how many times do they read the essays? What kind of small errors, proofreading, really matter in admissions essays? I'm sure a comma error wouldn't make a difference. So really what the essay, because this is what we're kind of knees deep in right now, like how quickly or how many times does a student or does an admissions reader get to read an essay? I would love to say that we would pour over them. I would love to say that we could sit there and read all of the nuances, because there are some wonderful essays. We love reading, or when I was in admissions, we love reading for voice. And my role within this company, College Admissions, is with the writing process and working with our students in these essays. Talk to any reader, they skim. Any admissions reader, they might have 30 seconds for it. So a lot of those small proofreading errors, which I get, you know, parents who get somewhat frustrated that perhaps we missed a double space here or there. When you are pushing down 40 applications a day, you're going for content in many ways. Margaret, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on this one.
Yeah, I think there may be some parents who are kind of thinking, okay, there's still a lot of questions that I have that I don't know where to go. School counselors are great. And you can also think about if you want to reach out to us, we love to talk to folks. This is what we do for fun and for work. We work for College Solutions, as we said before, and you're welcome to go to our website. You know, we do consultations for free. Don't worry about that. But if you just want to come in and ask a lot of questions and learn about, you know, what this would look like, you're welcome to. But I want you to know that as a UVA folk, like, we have a heart for you guys, and we know that this is full of stress. But I'll throw the website in the chat so you guys can find us. And we're glad to do another round of this and answer other questions. But you're doing the right thing. You're getting information. You're trying to support your kids in a way that makes them authentic. Keep it up.
Yeah, I think at this point we have reached close to 8 o'clock. If you guys do have any other questions, we're happy to answer them. If you want to reach out to us, to our company, this is stuff that we love discussing, a lot of this data stuff, and I'm sure there's a lot more out there that you may or may not. I know there's a lot of other questions that I wish we could have time to get to. But with that being said, Barbara, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in.
I do. Thank you very much. I was trying to figure out how to copy and paste your link, which is www.collegesolutions.com, but that's wonderful. Sorry about that. I had myself covered here while you were talking, so I wouldn't be distracting everyone. Thank you so much, Margaret and Stephanie, for going through this. I went through it twice, and boy, oh boy, was it, yeah. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying to the end. 159 people still staying with us. Wow. Thank you so much. And we'll see you again soon on another Zoom and another topic. Thank you so much. Have a great night.